Following the escape of the monstrous pirate Juzo Rameses, Straw Hat members Blackfoot Sanji and Roronoa Zoro have temporarily separated from their crew and allied themselves with Tashigi and Sanji's old flame Marion, captain of the Black Clover Pirates, in order to stop the threat while confronting the long-neglected demons from their past. Part 2. Quills. Standing aboard the bow of the Black Clover Pirates' flagship, the Cutthroat Bounty, the blonde chef and the stone-faced swordsman stood in silence as the salty wind whipped through their hair. Sanji sighed as he attempted unsuccessfully to relight his cigarette, despite the breeze making the lighter's small flame dance violently before vanishing. He despondently tossed the paper stick overboard as they sped towards their destination. "Luffy is never going to forgive us for this," Zoro muttered with cold certainty. "I wouldn't blame him. Taking off like this without his consent is practically mutiny." Sanji shrugged. "The first time I met you guys, Nami sailed off alone and took Mary with her. We didn't understand it, but there was never any question in Luffy's mind that she was still part of the crew." "This is different," Zoro replied. "We're sailing into a fight which doesn't involve us. Nami was confronting those who'd held power over her future. Alabasta wasn't our fight either." Sanji stretched his arms wide and instinctively popped a new smoke in his mouth before he even realized it would be pointless to try again. "We all fought together in Alabasta," Zoro countered. "Look, Mosshead, we can keep arguing until the sun sets, but the fact is, you're right here with me." Sanji crossed his arms. "I'm not proud of leaving the others in the dark, but once we get back and explain the situation, they'll understand." "I should have just knocked you out and tied you to the mast," Zoro glowered. "Then why didn't you?" Sanji raised a single curly eyebrow. "I didn't have any rope," he responded without humor. "Oh, I think I know why." Sanji glanced backwards over his shoulder towards the stern, where Tashigi stood speaking with the other Marines. The setting sun cast her in a golden light that made her look even more like an angel than she already did. He knew, despite her clumsy behavior, that she had a will of steel and the courage of a pirate warlord, though her smile, as always, was humble and shy. Sanji's eyes widened with passionate yearning, and his jaw hung open for several moments as he admired her before Zoro snapped his fingers in the chef's ear to bring him back to reality. "Stay focused, you moron. If we're heading into battle, I don't need you constantly getting distracted." Sanji reluctantly returned his gaze back to the open sea before he spoke again. "Look, I may be a shameless pervert, but just because you're not obvious about it doesn't mean you don't feel anything. There's something about her that makes you lower your shields. I don't know what it is, but it's not just because she's skilled with a blade." Zoro glared. "Drop it, or I'm putting you over the railing." "Ah, there's the exposed nerve. Didn't think your armor ever cracked." Sanji smirked. He lowered the unlit cigarette from between his teeth. The green-haired pirate gave him a withering look and made to leave before the chef spoke again, his eyes still fixed upon the sea. "Look, Zoro, seriously, whatever your reasons are, I appreciate you being here. I don't know what to expect, and if this is what finally kills me, I want to go knowing the others knew what happened, and that the ladies will be safe. I needed someone I could trust." He stuffed his hands deep in his pockets. "You're not going to get killed, you idiot." Zoro wrapped his fist around his katana's handle by his belt. "The smoking'll take care of that. But until then, Luffy's going to want to eat as soon as you get back, and you won't be able to use getting killed as an excuse." "Are you two having a moment?" Marion asked, suddenly appearing directly between them. Both men jumped, and Zoro's sword was out and raised to her chin before the words had finished leaving her lips. "You don't have to transport yourself across the ship!" Sanji snapped and slapped Zoro's blade aside. "Just walk up and join the conversation like a normal person." "Ah, normal is so boring," Marion smirked. "Besides, you used to love it when I surprised you." Sanji cut the abrupt change in conversation off at the knees. "Did you want something?" he asked bluntly. "Tashigi just received word from Smoker on their transponder snail. He's got 2 marine ships en route to Russet Peak, where my other 2 ships are set to meet us. With 5 ships, we can lay out a plan of attack and sail just across the bay to the old marine fort. Smoker reports there's a seastone cell there that I'm sure Rameses will find cozy." Marion had donned a black and silver cloak after returning to her ship and carried a cutlass by her side with an ebony blade. Since appearing in Sanji's kitchen unexpectedly, her demeanor had changed entirely from sassy temptress to rogue pirate commander. Rameses and the chess piece pirates will be expecting resistance from us, but you two will be our secret weapons, she continued. She turned to Zoro. From what I've heard, Lady Rook is more than formidable with a blade. She's practically two people when she wields them. Do you think you can hold her off while Sanji, Smoker, and I corner Rameses? Zoro didn't flinch. She'll just have to be another rung on the ladder I'm climbing. Love that sullen can-do attitude, Marian replied with a hint of sarcasm. If this scarecrow-looking guy can launch spiked missiles at us the size of fishing spears, it's going to have to be about speed and agility. Zoro crossed his arms and leaned against the rail. A strong offense will be the perfect defense. Sure, you can disappear, and we know Smoker well enough to know with his abilities he'll have a chance of getting in close. But the best this lanky smokestack can do is keep dodging projectiles and hope for the best. He nodded his head at Sanji. There's another threat he's going to deal with first, Marian responded. The Bishop is a new member of the Chess Piece Pirates. Very little is known about him other than he's lightning fast and moves like a shadow. The thing is, while his bounty is 25 million berries, Blackfoot Sanji's is more than twice that, and I doubt he can move so fast his feet catch fire. Sanji idly raised one of his feet and tapped his shoes with a knuckle. Rubber soles, that's the trick. I'll bet Bishop's wanted poster is more flattering, Zoro chided. Sanji glared sourly and stroked his chin. Speaking of which, I should get Toshiki to snap a new picture while I'm here. The Bishop doesn't have a wanted poster. No one has seen his face, Marian informed them. I'm not exaggerating when I say that if we capture all three, Rameses, Lady Rook, and the Bishop, clemency may be granted to the Clovers and the Straw Hats by the Navy, at least short term. Now where's the fun in that? Sanji smirked as he finally managed to spark a flame to life and light up his smoke. Trotting along the beach in his four-legged form, Chopper kept his nose low to the sand as he concentrated on locating the invisible trail his friends had left behind. Following in his footprints, Nami and Robin were scanning the horizon in every direction for a ship.
Nothing,
Chopper reported somberly, the painful weight of his failure reflecting in his normally warm and playful eyes.
Sanji and Zoro didn't leave the ship in either direction. It's like they vanished into thin air.
What about the other two? Nami asked urgently. Her fiery annoyance at the men's disappearance had dimmed to a cold panic that was throbbing in the pit of her stomach, though she was trying hard not to let it show. There were at least two other people on the ship with them, right? Both women? Chopper nodded his head confidently.
Definitely. One was the woman that appeared in our kitchen before, I'm sure of it. The other...
Chopper trailed off. What is it? Robin asked.
It's so familiar. I just can't place it.
Chopper clenched his teeth in frustration.
I know I've smelled her before. I just don't remember where.
Normally I'd say if the kidnappers were women, there's no wonder Sanji didn't put up a fight. Nami frowned. But Zoro too? No way. Something else is going on here. You said Sanji recognized this green-haired woman? Robin looked down at Chopper. If he didn't react by fawning over her, there has to be a history of bad blood there. Nami crossed her arms and made a pouting face. Since when has any other woman had more sway over him than the two of us? She huffed as she glanced sideways at the raven-haired beauty.
I didn't think Sanji would abandon us for any reason.
Robin stopped and raised an eyebrow. Are you jealous? Nami froze. What? No! She blushed furiously. Are you? I'm not sure. Should we be? Robin tilted her head, the hint of a smirk tracing itself up her cheek. Well, no, I mean... He's risked his life so often for the both of us, Nami stuttered. He's risked his life for dozens of women, Robin reminded her. But he always got back on the ship with us, Nami persisted. Robin put her hands on her hips and chuckled softly. You miss his constant gawking affection, don't you? Nami made a hissing noise through her teeth. Sanji is such an irritating smoke-spewing kiss-ass, but... You know, he's always been there. Now that he's suddenly gone, I didn't realize how much She trailed off. Robin nodded in gentle agreement. He's charming in his own way, but his perverted style of chivalry has always extended beyond the two of us. She looked out towards the setting sun. I've had men stare at me lustfully my entire life, But with him, it's like he's just as excited about making us breakfast the following morning as he is about us spending the night, you know? He's shallow on the surface, but he has a noble type of depth as well. Like he'll always have our well-being at heart. He's a good man, even though he's obnoxious. I miss him. Nami sighed heavily as she ran her hand through her hair. Not just the attention and the food, I actually miss him. She looked up to find Chopper back in his normal two-legged form, staring back at her. A silence hung in the air between them for a moment.
Did you two forget I was here?
The reindeer asked. Nami tackled Chopper, grabbed him by both of his antlers, and pressed her face directly into his, glaring daggers at him from point-blank range. If you ever tell him I said that, I will tie your pudgy little body to the anchor, spin you around in circles over my head, and heave you so far out to sea you'll clear the calm belt and wind up somewhere in the East Blue.
Gah! Okay, I promise!
Chopper wailed as he yielded in abject terror. Robin covered her mouth with her hand and chuckled.
Oi! Nami! Robin! Chopper! Anything?
The three of them turned to see Luffy and Usopp jogging up the beach behind them. Nami released Chopper's antlers and straightened up. There's no trace of them, Usopp called out. And if they're not on the island, whatever ship picked them up must have sailed away at breakneck speed. Nami noticed the fire in her captain's eyes as he approached. Rarely had she seen Luffy looking angry enough to bite through steel, though whether the rage was directed at his two missing crew members directly, or the mysterious circumstances surrounding their actions, she couldn't tell. Look! Nami removed her map from her pack and then took Sanji's note from her pocket. The note says wait 3 days. There's no island anywhere remotely close to here that they could reach in 3 days, much less a day and a half that they could sail to and come back. Then they must be sailing to specific coordinates on the water. Usopp stroked his chin. Or maybe there's an island out there that's uncharted, Robin suggested. If that's the case, the log post hasn't indicated it. Nami raised the tiny globe fastened to her wrist to double-check it. There's another question that needs to be addressed. Luffy spoke in a stern voice, his tone much darker than it normally was. If they're not back in 3 days, what do we do then? He looked at each of them for a moment, letting the question sink in. Nami broke the silence first. We'll just wait for them. Why? Luffy asked without hesitation. The word fell heavily from his lips into the sand like a concrete slab. Because, Nami paused.
They're our friends,
Chopper protested. They abandoned us without explanation and then gave us a deadline. Luffy's eyes seemed to burn angrier, even though his stern tone remained the same. If they're not back by then, all we can do is assume that they're not coming back. But that may be because they can't, Usopp stated, clearly alarmed at what his captain was implying. They may be in trouble! And they didn't leave us any way to find them or rescue them, Luffy replied bitterly. You all may have forgotten, but this is my ship. And this is my crew. Maybe I don't always act like it, but I'm the captain, and my rules are law. 2 members of my crew are gone, making their own plans, writing their own rules. Luffy, Robin spoke up. You know Sanji and Zoro. You trust them. We don't know the circumstances. They may be doing this to protect us from something. I decide when I need protection, Luffy stated bluntly. Whatever the situation was, they should have told me. That's why when the sun rises on the 3rd day, we set sail for the next island. We'll find a new cook and another swordsman and we'll adapt. If they ever find us again, I'll decide whether they should set foot on board. Does anyone have a problem with that? I do, Nami protested after a moment's pause, feeling the beginnings of angry tears begin to form. We can't do that, Luffy. We can't just sail away without even trying to find them. We don't leave our friends behind. I know you're angry, hurt even, but this isn't you. I joined this crew because you were the type of captain who would risk everything for any one of us, and you've proven that time and time again. Sanji and Zoro may have betrayed your trust, but they are not expendable. Nami met her captain's eyes, stone cold with conviction, and forced herself not to blink. She was breathing hard, trying to catch her breath after her outburst, and with each intake of air, she felt more defeated, standing against him alone. It was like she was drowning on dry land. Anyone else? Luffy asked. I agree with her, Luffy, Robin added, calmly yet firmly. I'm sorry. But at the very least, we can give them more time. We need to discover what their motives were before we judge them. I respect your authority as captain, but any captain is only as strong as the people who believe in him. I know Sanji and Zoro still believe in you."
That's right, Luffy!
Chopper exclaimed far too loudly.
As a doctor, I swore never to look the other way when someone may need help. But what if they're hurt and we have the chance to save them, but we just sail away?
Usopp grit his teeth before he spoke up.
"Luffy, you, Zoro, and Nami had every reason to leave me on that beach when you first boarded the Mary. You didn't know me anything, but you brought me aboard because you said we were friends. If it really was as simple as that, Zoro and Sanji are our friends too. They'll always be a part of the crew, and I'm willing to wait for as long as it takes."
Luffy didn't flinch.
So that's how you all feel.
We're confused, Luffy. We're worried and we're upset, but we don't feel betrayed. You shouldn't either. Nami took a step forward, squeezing the letter tightly in her hand. Luffy adjusted his straw hat and took a breath.
On the third day, I set sail with or without all of you."
He turned and walked slowly back up the beach towards the ship without looking back. Chopper, Robin, and Usopp all looked deflated and hurt, each with their eyes fixed downwards at a different patch of sand. Nami glared at their captain and finally let the tears flow freely down her cheeks. It wasn't Luffy's words that had set them free, but the way his voice had caught in his throat right before he said them. He was hurting just as much as the rest of them, perhaps even more so, but refusing to show it, and the pain of that refusal was driving his actions. The others could afford to let their emotions guide their decisions, but he didn't have that luxury. He certainly didn't want to leave them all behind, but he would do it. That's who the captain had to be, the one who made the final call because law and reason, always, had to override emotion in the end. As much as Nami loved him for choosing to be the one to make that call, she couldn't help but hate him for it as well. After a near-sleepless night below deck in a cramped marine cot, Sanji had attempted to enter the ship's galley to help make the pirate chefs make breakfast for the crew, but they had refused to allow him inside.
"Don't use butter to grease the pan!"
Sanji snapped before the door was slammed in his face. He walked up on deck and lit his first smoke of the day, and exhaled the tobacco cloud out over the railing where the wind caught it briefly before it vanished. Tashigi had assigned Zoro and himself a room to share below deck, but before he had even seen it, Marian had escorted him to the entrance of her private cabin. "This isn't your fight, Sanji," she had stated as she opened the door. "I made you break your moral code and lie to your friends. I don't want you to think that doesn't mean anything to me. Tomorrow, we could both be dead." She had delicately began to unbutton her nightshirt, and then held out her hand to him. Her eyes apologetic instead of seductive, her voice timid instead of teasing. Over her shoulder, Sanji had seen the spacious bed, beckoning them both forward. He had raised his hand reflexively to take hers, and for half a moment, his mind had sank into the joyous, passionate bliss he experienced whenever he was in the presence of a beautiful woman. But just as quickly, his mind returned to that night at Baratie. He remembered the blood on his hands, and the look in her eyes as she realized she had betrayed his trust. No, worse. Betrayed his love. He kept his expression neutral, and slowly shook his head before taking an agonized step backwards and away from her. Marian's face had fallen in embarrassment and disappointment. He turned his back on her as she called after him. "How many times can I say I'm sorry, Sanji? God damn you! Any woman now except me! Is that how it is?" Maybe, he thought sullenly to himself. He had walked 8 feet down the narrow corridor before he felt the moisture run down his chin and realized his nose was bleeding. He pulled out his handkerchief and held it to his face, trying in vain to prevent the blood from staining his suit. After taking the corner, he had leaned against the wall, his head spinning, his heart racing, his entire body rebelling against him for walking away from her like that. It had been so long, and he had waited so patiently for Nami or Robin to invite him into their warm embrace. But they hadn't, so he found satisfaction by making them smile in other ways. Even if they never would, he was determined never to stop treating them like royalty. In his mind, physical pleasure wasn't meant to be the endgame. Like any great feast, it was another dish to be enjoyed, but not to be appreciated so much that it made you ignore the rest of the wondrous selection before you. It was tasty, but it could never be served as the main course. The most rewarding and nourishing of all entrees was the sensation of them knowing he could be trusted. He would always be captivated by the view, but he would never betray his code and overstep his bounds. Had he chosen to indulge in what Marion had offered, it wouldn't have been real affection, and he would have undermined who he was at heart. Someone who chose himself over the woman. After what she had done, it was fitting she sleep with a dishonest man, but he knew it couldn't be him. Refocusing his mind on the present, he placed a foot upon the railing as the morning breeze tossed the cigarette smoke back up past his face and through his hair. Maybe one day he'd be able to forgive Marion, but not yet. Not here. Zoro sat at the very back of the ship, his legs hanging off the railing as he stared at the wake trailing behind them, the rudder every so often creaking as it made small corrections to keep them on course.
You weren't at breakfast.
Tashiki's voice came from just behind him, and suddenly she was leaning out over the railing right next to him. I was there. You just didn't have your glasses on, Zoro replied simply.
Was that a joke? From Roronoa Zoro?
Tashigi raised an eyebrow, not trying to hide her pleased astonishment. Zoro winced. That had been too familiar. As much as he hated to admit it, even if it was only to himself, the cook was right. Tashigi was different, not because of who she was, but who she consistently reminded him of. With her every gesture, toss of the hair, stern expression or spoken word, he was with Kuina again. It unsettled him. He had made his peace with her passing after many long years of heartache, and just when he had finished forging that molten pain into iron strength, here came this ghost to test him and turn him into a shaky-legged, clueless child again. He was always confident with every step he took, convinced it would make him stronger, faster, wiser. But with her, it was all a fog. He didn't know what the smarter path would be. To ignore the distraction, or to accept the renewed challenge and strive to conquer it even quicker. Like it or not, she was another weakness he had to overcome, and as long as he could identify them, he had to master them and turn them into strengths. When she had approached him the previous day after Sanji had reappeared, he could have denied her request and thrown her off the ship, but he found himself unable to form the words to do anything except hear her out. He had followed her less out of obligation and more out of furious vexation. He needed to make himself look into those eyes and see her for who she was. A young woman who was most definitely not his former rival, and therefore had no sway over him. But even now he could barely bring himself to turn his head. Should you be visiting with me like this in front of the other Marines? He asked, ignoring her question. She shrugged.
We're on a pirate ship. I can get away with speaking to pirates. I wanted to thank you again for joining us, and I wanted to apologize. I was, overly judgmental towards you back in Logetown. I thought you were just another lawless pirate with no respect for the weapons you wielded, but after what you did for the Princess of Alabasta and her people...
You have nothing to apologize for, Zoro replied, his eyes still focused on the ship's wake. You let us go afterwards. I don't think we ever thanked you for that. There was a moment of heavy silence between them.
I wish we didn't have to be enemies,
Tashigi said in barely more than a whisper. Zoro turned his head towards her a fraction of an inch. Who said I consider you an enemy?
My position and your bounty dictate how we have to see each other, she stammered, forcing her expression to remain professional.
And yet we're on a pirate ship together, conversing as friends. Even though our motivations may not be the same, at least for the time being, we share a common goal. Zoro was surprised how warm his voice sounded. That wasn't like him. Tashigi sighed and adjusted her bangs.
I used to think everything was so black and white, but I suppose being lawless doesn't make one evil.
You know who are incapable of seeing the world as anything except black and white? The chess piece pirates. After today, they won't be seeing much of anything.
Was that more humor?
Tashigi smirked. It hadn't escaped Zoro's notice that she had shyly been sliding herself closer to him every half minute. I have to ask you something. Zoro braced himself and made himself look her dead in the eye. and the shadow of Kuina's ghost was there, staring back at him through Tashigi's nervous yet determined eyes.
Okay,
She replied simply. Would you stay aboard the ship if I asked you to? Don't engage with the enemy, just remain back here out of harm's way. Tashigi's eyebrows shot up, and it was clear she wasn't sure whether to be touched or offended by his concern.
I'm the ranking officer, Zoro. These are my men, and I can't ask them to do anything I wouldn't do myself.
You're the ranking officer only until Smoker gets here, Zoro countered. It would be safer if you stayed on board.
Because I'm a woman?
Her eyes narrowed. Because you distract me. Zoro regretted saying it the moment the words fell from his lips. He hadn't planned on admitting that. It had just emerged like a caged beast he had so far been able to keep chained behind his teeth. But now that it was free, the only thing he could do was recapture it before it got away. I mean, the cook and I can handle this. I don't need any marine blood on my hands, especially yours. I don't need to give Smoker any more reason to hate us. He averted his gaze back out onto the open sea again, arms still crossed, poker face still sullen and unreadable. At least he hoped that was the case. Tashigi didn't speak for another moment. Then, her normally timid voice rang out strong like the golden bell of Skypiea.
My duty is to my mission and my men. I'm a Marine, and I won't ever ask others to die in my place while I stand by.
I'll be on that beach right next to you.
And if you don't like that, you're welcome to try and stop me now.
She placed one hand on her sword hilt to punctuate her words. Zoro felt the scathing heat of her challenge wash over him, and he remembered Kuina's steadfast refusal to yield to every challenge he had presented her. In fact, there had always been a stoic, fearless willingness to accept. Tashigi may not have been fearless, but her will was just as strong. Everything Kuina ever stood for was flowing through the veins of this woman as well, and to deny that would have been to deny what he had admired about his friend all those years ago. It wasn't mere coincidence. Zoro didn't believe in coincidence. Wherever she was now, this was her testing him again. All he could do was accept. You know, Marines and pirates, their codes aren't all that different, Zoro said softly. He spun around on the railing and stood up, straightening himself to his full height as he turned to face her. He set his hand on the small of her back, and his other hand on her left bicep. Tashigi's eyes widened at his touch, obviously taken aback at his tenderness. Don't ever lean forward, no matter how heavy your blade feels. Keep your feet planted and your stance strong. Avoid the sand whenever possible. It will throw you off your balance. Don't fall into your opponent's rhythm. Strike when you can, but don't ever sacrifice your cover, even for what could be a killing blow.
I know all of that,
Tashigi replied softly, glancing up into his eyes with a guilty look that implied she had been trying to avoid them. And now I know you do. Zoro drew her sword from off her side, and the young woman let out a gasp like he had just unbuckled her belt and her skirt had slipped. He examined the blade carefully. Well balanced, sharpened nicely. The weight isn't too much. She took the sword back indignantly, her hand brushing his as they made the exchange.
I'm stronger than I look,
she answered with conviction. One last thing then, Zoro added as he made to turn and walk off towards the helm.
What's that?
Don't lose your glasses. He walked down the steps and was halfway across the main deck before his stone face cracked, and the faintest shadow of a smirk played at the side of his lips. Zoro normally only felt a cold storm inside his chest, and he used its winds to drive his actions, and its lightning to power his strikes. But for at least a few short moments until he reached the bow, he would allow himself to feel a sensation of warmth as he reflected on the girl's fierce, yet puppy-like adorable brown eyes.